I wanted to lay out for you this piece that I started working on last night. I kind of added pieces to it through the evening as Louise and I were watching an old Cagney and Lacey. And Louise and I finished it up this morning and published it over at HartmannReport.com. And it's titled, Dear Republican Voter, What Did You Expect, right? When Ted Nugent and the NRA and the GOP told you that more guns in America would provide us with a safer, less violent society, what did you expect, Republican voters? I mean, seriously, did you think that suddenly every person in America was going to turn into a marksman and some kind of Wild West movie fantasy was going to be the outcome? Really? When Trump said that COVID was just like the flu, at the same time that he was telling Bob Woodward that it was a killer, what did you expect? I mean, when he pushed refusing to wear a mask like it was some sort of declaration of masculinity and openly encouraged states and cities to stay open in the face of this pandemic in order to give us herd thinking, did you really think it would keep 500,000 Americans from dying? When Trump sent thousands of modern-day brown shirts to storm the U.S. Capitol and try to kill Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi so Trump could become the nation's first strongman dictator, what did you expect, Republicans? Did you really believe that American democracy was outdated, that our country would be better run by a billionaire oligarch and his cronies instead of the will of the voters? Seriously? When 5 Republican-appointed justices on the Supreme Court in 2010 in the Citizens United decision ruled that when billionaires and big corporations bribe politicians, that's no longer called a bribe. That's now called free speech and protected by the First Amendment. When that happened to Republican voters, what did you expect? Did you believe it was going to work out well for democracy in America? Has it ever in any country? I mean, when Republican lobbyist Grover Norquist went on NPR and echoed the line that Reagan, both Bushes, and even Trump have said that, the big government's a dangerous thing. We need to shrink it down to where it's small enough that we could drown it in the bathtub. When he said that, Republican voters, what did you expect? Did you really think that gutting environmental and banking protections was going to help us? That letting corporations dump more pollution into our air and water and poison our children was going to make America better? Did you really think that restricting access to Medicaid and unemployment benefits and disability assistance was going to improve this country? Seriously? Republican voters, when Donald Trump and Reagan and both Bushes told you that if we just showered billionaires with tax cuts and subsidies for our biggest corporations, like the $600 billion a year we give to the oil industry, that all that money is going to trickle down and help you out. Right? Did you really think those billionaires were going to happily just pass their tax cuts along to you as a pay raise, Republican voters? Seriously? I mean, when Republican governors across the country told you, and not just Republican governors, the think tanks too, that only for-profit electric companies can provide you with safe, reliable power. Those nonprofits that are owned by state and county and municipal governments, oh, those are terrible, right? That's government. They don't have the profit motive. When they told you that, what did you expect? I mean, did you really think that Enron ripping people off or PG&E setting, a chunk of California on fire was just some weird anomaly? Or that when the Texas power grid melted down because of a winter storm, just like they had just 10 years ago, that was just like a fluke? Seriously? Republican voters, when Ronald Reagan and every Republican since him told you that destroying labor unions was a good thing and would help American workers, really, seriously, what did you expect? Did you really think that no longer having organized workers, solidarity, representation against organized capital would somehow lift up American workers and cause CEOs to cut their own or keep their own pay reasonable? Seriously? Republican voters, when George H.W. Bush told you that the nation needs to double down on Nixon's war on drugs and put more people in prison, particularly those black people who are selling crack cocaine across the street from the White House. Remember when George Bush Sr. set that thing up? He set up a sale so that he could wave it a bag of cocaine on TV. If you're old enough, you remember it well. It was a big deal. He held a national television, press conference about it. Did you really think, Republican voters, that putting millions of black people in prison for decades, like Bush did, like he pitched with his Willie Horton ad, that was somehow going to make America a better place to live? Really? Are you that racist? Republican voters, when Donald Trump tried to cut off food stamps to 1 million people in the middle of a pandemic, a policy that Joe Biden literally just reversed, I believe it was yesterday. When Donald Trump said that he was going to cut off those food stamps to force people back to work in the middle of a pandemic when there's 20 million missing jobs, what did you expect? When former oil industry CEOs, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, told you that Iraq's Saddam Hussein, who, by the way, just coincidentally was sitting on the second largest oil reserve in the world, was plotting to kill America. When our own weapons inspector, Scott Ritter, and the UN weapons inspector, Hans Blick, were going on international television saying, this guy has no weapons. He doesn't represent a threat to anybody. But Bush and Cheney were pushing this really hard. Did you really expect that something good was going to come out of that? Seriously, Republican voters, did you think that America could conquer a country, sell off its natural resources, and the people in that country would just be like, oh, this is nice. We're happy with this. Thank you very much. I mean, how'd that work out in Vietnam? When Wall Street billionaire Pete Peterson and his buddies in the GOP put up the debt clock and started saying, well, Social Security is just a Ponzi scheme. It's going to go broke. We need to turn it over to Wall Street bankers like Pete Peterson. What did you expect? Did you think that those bankers and the Republicans they own were actually going to help build a stronger social safety net for America? When Reagan's Interior Secretary, James Watt, Republican voters told you it's just fine to sell off federal lands for pennies on the dollar because Jesus is coming back and he's going to make all things new. What did you expect? For that matter, when Trump's Interior Secretary, a coal lobbyist for God's sake, said the same thing without invoking Jesus. Did you really expect it was going to help our public lands? Did you think it had nothing at all to do with these massive campaign contributions from to the GOP? Seriously, Republican voters.